Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Yurachek.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Doug Weber, and he is an associate professor of bioengineering at the University of Pittsburgh, and he actually, for 4 years, worked at DARPA as well, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency of the U.S. And he is interested in hand proprioception and touch interfaces, so haptics, basically getting feedback from prosthetic limbs, so to cut down on phantom limb and to make prosthetics much more useful. And he's also interested in electrical prescriptions, so ElectRx, which is basically bioelectronic medicine. So bioelectronic medicine, as you may remember from our earlier episodes, is basically attaching an implant to the peripheral nerves, the vagus nerve, and being able to control organs. And what he wants to do, he wants to use this neuromodulation for inflammatory diseases and mental health disorders. So very interesting conversation. Really, this guy has done everything. And hopefully you enjoyed it. And we'll talk more on the other side.
I guess I grew up a bit of a nerd, and like a lot of nerds in the 80s, computers were just becoming a thing, and I thought, these are really cool, and robotics were just starting to emerge. They were still, very bulky and industrial at that point, but I thought, computers and robotics and this idea of automation, that sounded very appealing. So I went off to college, and I started as an electrical engineer, thinking that that would be my best path towards becoming a robotics engineer or an automation engineer. But about halfway through, or sort of throughout my first couple of years there, I met a couple of students that were taking my electrical engineering courses, but they were students in a different discipline. They were biomedical engineering students, so that was a term I hadn't heard before. And so I was like, biomedical engineering, that sounds interesting. Tell me more. And so after a few classes like that, I decided, maybe being an electrical engineer is not for me, and I decided I would give bioengineering a go. So I switched and spent my last 2 years sort of catching up on my bioengineering degree and graduated without really a plan. I hadn't really thought it through all the way because I wasn't really sure what a bioengineer does to earn a living. It just sounded really cool, so I thought I should do it.
You did it to get the ladies, huh?
Totally, chicks dig bioengineers. There's no doubt about that. So anyways, I just kind of on a whim switched from EE to bioengineering, and again without really any deep insight into where it might take me. And so, I ended up in graduate school doing research, and I had this kind of long-standing interest in controls and control systems and robots. But the fact that I ended up in a research lab that was trying to train monkeys to control a robotic arm with their brain was just really, really dumb luck. It was a really fortunate convergence of all of my areas of interest, the controls, the neuroscience and biology, with robots. And so, what cooler things are there than robots and brains? And so that's kind of where things started. I spent my PhD years trying to understand how the brain makes corrections when there's a mistake or an error in a reaching movement. So, how does it know what the error is, and how does it make adjustments to its muscle output to compensate for those errors? And so that kind of started me on the path to looking at issues related to sensory feedback and the role that sensation and sensory inputs play in governing how we move in the world. And that's kind of where my research has focused for the last 20 years, is understanding sensory feedback and its role in controlling movements of arms and legs.
Interesting. So I saw that you were interested, or that you were working both on kind of like bioelectronics and this, neuroprosthesis. So which one? I mean, it sounds like maybe you're more focused on the neuroprosthesis.
So I have a bit of a complicated backstory, right? So I have a lab at the University of Pittsburgh, and I've been here for over 12 years now. But I took a bit of a break from my university affiliation, and did what you might consider an extended sabbatical as a program manager at DARPA. I started doing work at DARPA that aligned very closely with the work I was doing at my lab in Pittsburgh, but I expanded well beyond that during my tenure at DARPA. So we started doing work in sensory motor prosthetics, but then after that moved into bioelectronic medicines, so developing neurotechnology to treat disease. And then we took it one step further to try to develop neurotechnology to not treat disease, but to take otherwise healthy people and make them better, smarter, faster, enhance their cognitive abilities with neurotechnology.
I don't know why, but I somehow thought that the DARPA position that you were drafted into it, like you almost didn't have a choice, kind of like jury duty or something like this. But it was a voluntary thing.
Sure, it was voluntary. I mean, there was certainly a lot of recruiting involved. In terms of it, I didn't have to go to the position, but there were some trade-offs that I had to consider very carefully before accepting it.
Was it blackmail related?
I will not answer that question.
Okay.
Call Jack Judy up and ask him to tell you the story. He's someone you should have on your show, anyways, and he can explain just exactly how he twisted my arm. But anyways, what really was the main deciding factor for me was President Obama's announcement of the Brain Initiative in his State of the Union address in 2013. Because I was just starting to have the conversations with the folks at DARPA about, basically walking away from my lab for a period of 4 years and, doing something, similar, but in a very different role as a government officer. And so I was, reluctant. I had a lot of concerns about what would happen to my students, what would happen to my funding, and so. It wasn't an easy decision, but in the end, I'm very glad. First of all, grateful for the opportunity, but most of all, glad that I decided to go, because it was an amazing time. 4 years that went by really quickly, but I think we got a lot done, and I am excited to see what things will emerge from the investments that we made over the past 4 years.
So what exactly did your day-to-day look like? I mean, what were you doing in DARPA? And, were you just like handing out huge grants, like $100 million grants, boom, 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 boom?
Well, so I guess I didn't, again, one of these very big life decisions that I made without a lot of foresight. And so I just kind of assumed that when I got there, they would give me a big sack of money, and I would just have to figure out smart ways to spend it.
Like a tooth fairy for scientists.
Kind of, right? Because I think everyone has this illusion of DARPA as this big bank that has endless supplies of money to invest in whatever fancy they're attracted to on a given day. But in reality, it's actually, it's a medium-sized funding agency, I would say, but it's very small in comparison to, say, the National Institutes of Health. And so as a result, they have to be very strategic about where they make their investments. And so they look for areas that present new and important opportunities for supporting the national security mission of creating breakthrough technologies for our nation's safety. So as a result, because they have to be very selective and choosy about the projects they work on, I learned you have to go through a process, which is not unlike writing a grant proposal, where you have to be specific about what the research opportunity is and why it's important for DARPA to pursue. And so you have to plead your case and justify what it is you're trying to do and why you think it's important. And it's only after you sort of make all of those arguments successfully that they give you the money that you need to do the work. Now, I make it sound like it's this long drawn out process. It's not. They're very efficient about how they evaluate these research ideas, but it's a very busy and sort of stressful thing to be trying to put together a DARPA worthy program and then justify its worth to the leadership of the agency.
Wow. So it kind of sounds like 4 years of grant writing. Is that correct or no?
Yeah, I thought sabbaticals are also we're supposed to be about taking a break from grant writing, but
Yeah, and having fun. That sounds like the opposite.
yeah, right. No, it was definitely fun, and the grant writing part was really just a small part. The most exciting and invigorating part about the job is working with colleagues at DARPA and working with colleagues in the community to try to identify what those new opportunities are. Like we all complain about what the big problems are, but identifying promising new opportunities to address those problems is really hard. But it's also really exciting when you bring together a bunch of smart people to try to think creatively about how you might go about doing that. And so a lot of what we've tried to do in the neurotechnology portfolio, which I was a part of, is identify kind of the really important questions on both the physiology side, understanding key aspects of our neurophysiology that then becomes an enabler for designing technology, and then in parallel with that, looking at the technology that we're using to interface with the nervous system and identify what are the key capabilities and limitations. And then for those things, for those areas where there are limitations, think creatively about what alternatives might exist to overcome those limitations. So I always pick on the electrodes people. So electrodes, wires basically that we stick into nerves and brain, are what we've been using for over 100 years to try to communicate with the nervous system. And the great thing about wires and electrodes is they're fairly reliable. That is, we know how to plug wires into different parts of the nervous system, and we have realistic expectations about what we can do with those electrodes. But we also know that there are things that we simply can't do. Right? It's impossible to take a piece of wire, stick it in the brain, and with high precision control which neuron that a wire will talk to. There are physics we can't control with an electrode, and so that there are limits in terms of the precision with which we can use electrodes to interface with the nervous system, and then there's also the fact that we have to do a surgery to usually put the wires where we want them, and so some of the dreams that we have for the future of neurotechnology is to eliminate the need for wires, achieve kind of the ultimate in control over which neurons we communicate with, and then to be able to do that at a distance, right? To be able to place a patch on your scalp that can read signals from any neuron in your brain, or to modulate the activity of any neuron in your brain. These are just dreams right now, but those are the types of things that, the types of sort of big problems that we try to think about clever ways to solve.
What's coming down the pipeline? I mean, you had your finger on the pulse pretty well, so you might know what's been funded recently and what kind of results we might be expecting in the next few years, right?
Sure. So I can maybe I'll just spend a few minutes talking about each of the three programs that I started at DARPA, because I think they represent important and major sectors in the neurotechnology space. So the first program is called Haptics, and that stands for hand, proprioception, and touch interfaces. And so here it's very simple. Think of the Luke Skywalker hand, and that's what we're trying to do. So it's a prosthetic hand that looks like a human hand, so it has all of the fingers and joints, and then can move dexterously like a human hand can. And when it moves and when it makes contact with objects in the environment, you can feel something, right? You have your hand is a very important sensory organ, Yet none of our prosthetic limbs provide any sensation. So Haptics was aimed at building implantable neural interfaces that essentially turn prosthetic hands into lifelike hands, hands that move and feel like natural hands. And in terms of what's coming down the pike there are several teams working on various components of that problem, and all are working on technology that is either already being used in humans or will soon be used in humans, human amputees. And the goal is that by February of 2019, the program will be starting a year-long experiment where we take the technology, implant it in people, and then send them home. Let them, test the technology in the field. So taking the training wheels off, getting the technology out of the lab, and letting people use it in their activities of daily living. So in their home, in their community, where we expect we'll learn a lot of things. Hopefully we'll learn what features of the technology offer true value for those patients, and then help guide further refinements of that technology such that it can be commercialized and made available to the broader community of potential users.
Wow, that's really cool. And yeah, I heard if you have like feedback, like if you can actually sense what the arm is doing, then you don't have phantom limb control. I actually just heard that on a podcast today, a German one, so I don't know if I understood it correctly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know what the numbers are. I think it's like 2/3 of amputees, maybe the percentage is greater, experience phantom limb sensations, and then a majority of those experience actual pain. And it's like a lot of biology. There's a lot we don't know, but what seems to be the case is that it's the loss of sensory input that contributes to the illusions of phantom pain or phantom sensations. So your brain is essentially starving for input from the hand, which is no longer there, and as a result, it creates this illusion of a hand that's not there, or at least that's sort of one lay hypothesis about what's going on. But what's really cool, regardless of whether or not that's the mechanism by which phantom sensations occur or not, is that once you restore sensation for the hand, phantom vanishes, or at least is somewhat attenuated. And so so when you bring life back to those sensory nerves that are cut off from the missing hand, those illusions of pain and body parts go away. So so that's one potentially very clear benefit for this haptics technology. But the other is one you alluded to as well, in that the function of the hand also depends critically on sensation. And I'm sure in the Ukraine you've experienced probably more than one or two cold days where your hands were numb and you fumbled with buttons or zippers. When you lose sensation from your fingers, it becomes very difficult to do even simple things. And so it's very important that we provide at least some sensation to users of these more complex prosthetic hands, or those prosthetic hands will be as clumsy as a numb hand on a cold day, I guess.
Or even worse, probably, because you have trained your hand. You trained your hand over the years, yeah, and you never really had the feedback before in the prosthetic one. So yeah, it would be much worse, huh?
Yeah, but I mean, it is really amazing at because we've all experienced it, right? Your arm goes numb because you sleep on it wrong or something. And the loss of sensation can be, extremely debilitating. And it can go from just being clumsy to being completely dysfunctional. So yeah. I mean, I think there's lots of evidence, clinically and in the neurophysiology literature, of just how important sensory feedback is for almost all aspects of motor control. And so, basically, if you can't if you can't feel, you can't really move.
Yeah, so I guess Scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz Wait, was it Scarecrow that he wanted to feel, right?
Uh, yeah, he wanted a brain, I guess, so he could feel. Yeah.
Okay, one of
But
those guys, I
so
think.
that's right. So that's Haptics. So lots of exciting stuff happening there. They're doing, a lot of early work in humans right now to work out some of the technology questions. The goal is to have a complete system, something that's not yet a commercial device, but is starting to look more like, a prototype for a commercial device. And again, the goal is to get the technology in the real world, soon, because we're not interested in just creating lab demos. We want something that, actually makes it out into society. So the second program is called Electrics, which is shorthand for electrical prescriptions. And this really falls into that bioelectronic medicines domain, where we want to use nerve stimulation as a way to treat disease without having to use drugs. If we can modulate signaling in the nervous system, then perhaps that may offer exciting alternatives to treating really a wide range of diseases of the body. And I mean, I can say more about it, but I think you've had a lot of guests already kind of talking about this field. It's very exciting. There's a lot of old and new players. Medical device companies like Medtronic have been working in this space for decades, and they continue to innovate. But what's really exciting is that there's a lot of new players as well. And so I think the fact that there's a lot of growth in this area, I think that's really exciting, really promising.
Yeah, actually, I think maybe the last 10 people haven't really talked about it so much. So maybe the listeners haven't really heard so much about it. Like, because it was at the very beginning, we heard a lot about it, but since then not. So yeah, do you want to do a rundown and talk about some of the exciting stuff in this category or what's coming up?
Yeah. I mean, I can talk, first very generally about the concept, and then I'll talk more specifically about the things that I tried to do in the context of the Electrics program. So the concept is really very simple, right? There's nerves that innervate all of the major organs of the body, and sometimes the function of those organs becomes compromised. People have arrhythmias, disorders of the heart, where the heart doesn't, either beats too fast or beats too slow. And so Medtronic was one of the first companies to bring a device to market to treat arrhythmias, right? The cardiac pacemaker was probably the first bioelectronic medicine. It's still probably one of the most maybe the most widely used bioelectronic medicine to date. But more recently, groups have started exploring the use of nerve stimulation in a much wider variety of applications. And so work by Kevin Tracy, who's at the Feinstein Institute on Long Island. He did some pioneering work to show that stimulation of the vagus nerve, which is the largest nerve in the body and innervates most of the major organs of the body. He showed that by electrically stimulating the vagus, it's possible to suppress inflammatory disease, which has now become basis for a number of new therapies for a range of inflammatory diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory diseases of the gut, so Crohn's disease, and so on. So the general concept is, can we access the neural pathways that communicate functions for our visceral organs, and if so, can we use that signaling pathway to reduce someone's disease status? Okay, so in order to do that, right? So if that's the concept, is to treat disease through neurostimulation, then a key question is, well, which nerves do we stimulate, and how do we stimulate them? Stimulation is not a binary thing, right? There's a pattern by which you can stimulate the nerve, and that pattern is crucial for determining whatever the downstream response is. And so the two key questions of where to stimulate and how to stimulate are sort of where we begin the process of designing a bioelectronic medicines therapy. But then once we know where and how to stimulate, then the next question is, what technology do we have available, to do that effectively in a patient, right? So this is where the neural implant technology becomes a key determinant of what's possible in terms of the therapy. Because you may find in doing your scientific studies that in order to evoke the desired therapeutic effect, you have to stimulate activity in this tiny group of neurons, and they're the smallest, most difficult to access nerve fibers in the nerve. And then if you stimulate, other nerves around them, then you don't get the desired effect. And so what you need then is a device that is very, very spatially precise and modality specific. So it stimulates just the cells that you want and none others. And if that's what the neurophysiology dictates, then that's what the engineers need to provide. But the unfortunate reality is right now we don't have technology that can offer that level of precision. So the second thrust of the Electrics program was really aimed at creating technology, neural interface technology, that provides better control over the recruitment or inhibition of neural activity. So basically high precision neural interfaces. And then we also sought to reduce the invasiveness of devices. So instead of having to require an open surgery where you sort of tunnel down to find the nerve and then wrap electrodes around or tuck inside the nerve, we want devices that are injectable or even wearable. So instead of having to do a big surgery, if you can just visualize the target with ultrasound or fluoroscopy, then can we use a needle to install the neural implant and do that in a much simpler, safer procedure than open surgery. So reducing the invasiveness of the devices and then making them more precise in their activation. Two of the things we sought to improve on the technology side of things. So we're looking at things like optogenetics as a way to improve precision, because with optogenetics, it becomes we think the community thinks it's going to be possible to specifically promote expression of these light sensitive ion channels in only a certain class of cells. And so if that's when we work out the genetic engineering tools that will make that possible, then we will have that sort of high precision capability for modulating neural activity. And we'll also have the ability, one really powerful capability that's also uniquely enabled by optogenetics is the ability to both excite and suppress signaling in nerves. There are a few techniques to suppress activity with electrical stimulation, but in general, it's very difficult to do anything but stimulate activity in a nerve with electricity. But with optogenetics, it's very simple. It's a matter of installing the right ion channel into the membrane and then activating it with light. And you can produce a hyperpolarizing effect on the nerve, which will shut down transmission of signals. So there's just a lot of control that is enabled, uniquely enabled by optogenetics, which is why the field is so excited about it. I know Ed Boyden was one of your early guests, and he did a great job of explaining that technology. So I would refer your listeners to that podcast. But another technology that we're investing in is ultrasound. So there's a lot of exciting work demonstrating the ability to modulate neural activity with ultrasound, even in the brain. So Jamie Tyler at Arizona State did a lot of the early work in this area, and I think he's still active in this space. He showed that using high intensity focused ultrasound You can modulate brain activity, through the scalp, through the skull. So, without having to do brain surgery, it might be a tool for modulating neural activity even deep inside the body. So there's a lot of intriguing potential there. But what bothers me and what bothers, I think, a lot of other people in the field is we know very little about just how exactly ultrasound is modulating activity in nerves and in the brain. So I invested in a couple of projects that were aimed at really teasing apart those basic mechanisms. Because obviously, if we want to engineer a technology that's going to work to directly affect function in the brain, it would be helpful to know how that technology works, so we can engineer the technology to be, both safe and effective. So we have a couple groups trying to understand the mechanisms, and then there's another area of ultrasound in the context of neuromodulation that's exciting. And that's using ultrasound as a way to communicate with very, very small implanted devices. So, have you come across neural dust in your research? So, neural dust is this concept for making neural implants, as we like to say, vanishingly small. And so, we've had wireless communication, wireless implants for a while, but there's these are wireless implants that work like your phone using electromagnetic energy as the way to communicate. But there are fundamental limits in terms of how small you can make those devices, because the antenna on your phone needs to be at least a certain size, or it won't be very useful. And so if you make the antenna too small, then it becomes very, very difficult to transmit any signal to that antenna. But ultrasound, with the wavelengths that which ultrasound operates and the way that sound passes fairly freely through salt water, which is most of our body, it becomes very easy to transmit energy and focus it on devices that are very small and placed deep inside the body. And so we're exploring the use of ultrasound as a way to power and communicate signals with a network of very small devices in the body for both neurostimulation and biosensing applications. So we funded some of the initial neural dust work. We're still funding some of that work. There's also a group at Stanford that has developed a technology which, in terms of the form factor, looks much like neural dust, but operates on some very different principles. But in both cases, it's really exciting technology because it now paves the way for devices that are truly injectable. Like these are devices that are so small that they could be loaded in the barrel of a needle and then delivered to very small targets deep inside the body.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I haven't really had anybody that's talked about neural dust. I mean, I guess DJ Seo at UC Berkeley came up with this, and now he's on the Neuralink team with Elon Musk.
Yeah, so my guess is he may not be able to talk further about that. If you can get Michelle Maharbis on your show, he's terrific. Amin Arbabian at Stanford is also a leader in this area. I don't want to do too much name dropping, but there's this is a fairly small community right now, but it's one that I'm quite confident is going to grow. Another person I should name is Bruce Toe at ASU, because he actually published some papers in the 90s or early 2000s, which actually demonstrated the neural dust concept. A decade before the phrase neural dust was ever proclaimed. So So there are a handful of people working in this field, and I think talking to any one of them would be very interesting.
Yeah, that would be cool. I mean, it sounds like the future. Like injectable. I mean, you don't have to have extremely invasive brain surgery to have this, implanted, and then potentially you could have some biomarkers or something like this, so it goes only to the place that it needs to go. And yeah, it sounds like the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned brain surgery. Someone else to consider talking to is Tom Oxley, who's currently living in New York, but I think he has a lab in Australia. But he and his colleagues at the University of Melbourne in Victoria, Australia, invented a technology called the Stentrode. Are you familiar with vascular stents? These are sort of little wire cages that you put inside blood vessels to provide mechanical support.
Yeah, I was actually supposed to be. They wanted to have me sign up for a PhD that would design these, and I'm like, I want to do neural stuff instead.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, man. You should rethink that.
Oh no.
Because well, no, I mean they published a really great paper in Nature Biotechnology about a year ago. So they've demonstrated proof of concept in a large animal, and they're working aggressively to commercialize the technology. Definitely recommend you talk to Tom or Nick Opie or one of their colleagues, because I think it's really exciting technology. But you combine that with some of these injectable devices that we've been talking about, and now you have a way to deliver devices, without surgery, or I guess endovascular surgery is still surgery, but you can essentially use blood vessels as the delivery path for your brain implants. So you deliver the electrode through the vascular system, and install it where at this precise target in the brain, where you want to either record or stimulate activity.
Yeah, I think that's called an inpatient procedure, right? Like you don't have to spend the night in the hospital, something like this.
That would be outpatient. Yeah. Inpatient means that you're sort of checking in for the day or for the night, and you're going to be monitored for some period of time. But outpatient means you come in, maybe there's a brief bout of general anesthesia. Maybe it's just a local anesthetic, but basically you're in and you're out all in the same day. Technology like the Stentrode or any of these injectable technologies really do sort of become a key enabler for reducing the complexity of these device implants.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. I hope that happens. So I have a question, like what do you see people doing, or what are people doing in this field that you disagree with, or that they're going down the wrong path?
Oh man, so I should criticize my peers for all the mistakes they're making? Is that what you want to know?
Yeah, I'm trying to start a feud. I'm trying to start a blood feud.
you realize how peer review works, right?
Yeah.
No, this is tricky, right? I think I'll start by saying what I think is really great about the field, and that's that neurotechnology is really hot right now. There's a lot of interest in growing and diversifying the community of people working in neuroscience and technology to improve neuroscience and the treatment of neurological disease. And that's attributed directly to President Obama's BRAIN initiative, and DARPA and NIH and NSF and really lots of other federal agencies and even private funding organizations are making substantial investments in neurotechnology. So that's great. The fact that there's already a well-established industry, but one that is also growing and diversifying in terms of the types of areas and the types of people that are being drawn to it. So the Elon Musks and Brian Johnsons and Facebooks and GSKs of the world, these are high flyers from a very different world that are now setting their attention on neurotechnology, and I expect great things will come of that. So that's all the really great stuff, and it's a good time to be a neural engineer. Reluctant to say, but I think if there's one criticism that I personally have is that there's really too much hype, or I think there might be too much hype surrounding the brain. Even the tagline for this show, you talk only about brain implants, and the reality is that the nervous system includes many cells outside of the brain that offer very important targets for treating a wide variety of neurological conditions, including diseases of the brain, using peripheral nerve stimulation. So I think if there's one criticism that I have is that there's too much attention placed on brain and not enough attention placed on peripheral nerve and even spinal cord. So I think that's changing. I think the field of bioelectronic medicines is attracting more interest to peripheral nerves as a potential therapeutic target. I think from a commercialization standpoint, I think there's a lot more opportunities. The challenges associated with creating an implant that targets a peripheral nerve are just fewer than they are for the brain. I mean, anything that requires opening the skull is just trickier than creating a device that you tuck inside or wrap around a nerve. So from a safety standpoint, from a device complexity standpoint, peripheral nerves are very attractive. From a reliability standpoint, we know how to make devices that can interface precisely with nerves for very long periods of time. Similar capabilities don't yet exist for the brain, and so I think there are things that we can do better in nerve than we can do in the brain. Right now, I'm not saying we should abandon our brain research. I think there's a lot of really exciting opportunities that are being explored there, a lot of important fundamental questions that are being addressed, a lot of exciting new technologies that are being developed. And there are clearly examples of conditions that can only be treated with a brain implant because of either damage to the peripheral nerve or to the spinal cord. That renders the periphery dysfunctional. So someone with a spinal cord injury, a brain-computer interface may be their best hope for achieving neural control of an assistive device. But I just think that there's a lot of exciting opportunities in the periphery that don't always get recognized as much as the brain. Because the brain is this mysterious.
I don't know how you're going to find a job after this, or even go outside. After such a harsh criticism of the industry.
Right. Right. I know. I totally dissed all of my brain.
Well, that's actually, I did name this podcast the Neural Implant Podcast to include, I was thinking like a brain machine interface podcast or what, but I'm like, okay, well, I want to include this. And I'm in the same camp as you. As I've gone and done these interviews and everything like this, I'm like, whoa, actually this peripheral nerve stuff is really, that could be a bigger future. I mean, as you said, maybe the short term, the short term, the brain, it doesn't really, I don't know, it's too complicated. So maybe that's like 15, 20 years down the line. But this peripheral nerve stuff is more like 5 years down the line. And also, I mean, from what I see, it seems like there's a better market for it. I mean, because basically with this, bioelectronic medicine, you could essentially replace or supplement a lot of the pharmaceutical industry, which is a $1.4 trillion industry. And so, yeah, there's a lot of potential money there too. So that's kind of what I see is like, this is the bigger future. So that's why originally I was like, oh yeah, brain implants. But now I'm like, oh yeah, vagus nerve implants. All
right. So maybe you can figure out a way to anonymize my comments. So I'm not exiled or kicked off the neuroscience island, if you will. But no, I mean, I think most people, appreciate the importance of both, and certainly fellow researchers in the community appreciate the importance. But I think it's when the public and the popular press gets a hold of, and provides coverage of some of the work that's going on. Even when they're covering a story that is describing someone's use of muscle signals to control a robotic arm, they almost always will say that this device measures signals from the brain to control a robotic arm. And while that's technically true, because many of the signals that drive muscles, depend on signals that are coming from the brain, the reality is that the signal that's being used is a muscle signal, not a brain or nerve signal. So anyways, it's a pet peeve of mine, and peripheral nerve people are certainly contributing meaningfully to the community.
Yeah. Brain, like having a story about, brain implants is a lot more sexy than having a story about peripheral nerve implants. Hey everyone, hopefully you enjoyed that. Yeah, it was a little bit abrupt at the end because actually he quit out like 5 seconds too early, and we were so close to almost losing the file. So it was very close. I was nervous. I was on the edge of my seat for a little bit, like, oh no, are we gonna have to redo this? It was really an excellent show. I really enjoyed it, but luckily he found a button and he was able to upload what he had to upload. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I found this to be really interesting. I really liked it. Like he's basically been doing three areas, like the three biggest areas of neural implants. And I especially like the bioelectronics. Again, we haven't had anybody on for a few, like 10 episodes or something like that that's really talked heavily about bioelectronics. So I found that to be really interesting. And, having a perspective from DARPA as well, that was cool, to see kind of a little bit what goes on behind the scenes and, what goes on behind these steel doors, these metal steel doors. Metal steel doors, yeah. Metal steel doors that, guarded by soldiers and all this kind of stuff. But it was really funny that he said that it wasn't like limitless amounts of money, because that's actually the way I see it. That's the way I always saw DARPA, was like, oh, wow, DARPA's coming. Unlimited money now. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. It was really cool to have like all these aspects of research and neural implants and brain-machine interface and everything like this explained. So I think this was quite a treat, and hopefully he'll be back on again because he has a lot to teach, and he was really talking about Pittsburgh and everything like this. Like, oh man, this is a really good place for the neural implants. So I'm gonna look into it. Anyways, guys, hopefully you enjoyed it, and we'll talk again next week.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.